We have some huge updates to go over today as Jeff Passan has just came out and dropped a bombshell report as it pertains to the Toronto Blue Jays trade plans. And as the deadline inches closer and closer, rumors and reports are really starting to pick up. And we got some information from the most notable reporter himself in Jeff Passan. I'm going to break that down as well as discuss multiple new Jays updates following a brutal loss last night. We have some big updates as it pertains to not only people returning, but also some interesting things down in the minor leagues. A ton to go over today, folks. But before we get into it, your guys' support has been unbelievable. You've been absolute beasts. If you're a part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, this is the place to be for daily Jays content, multiple videos a day. And as the trade deadline inches closer and closer, July 31st here, sorry, this is going to be the place to be. So make sure to stay tuned for all of that and hit that subscribe button. Thank you guys again. Ladies and gentlemen, let's dive right into it. Now, Jeff Passan yesterday dropped an interesting article. And within that article, gave some interesting insights surrounding the Toronto Blue Jays trade plans. Now, of course, we discussed the Keegan Matheson one we had, and there's been a bunch of rumors about the Jays going all in, even from John Schneider himself. But you can see this here. This said, we'll start here. For what to know surrounding the Blue Jays trade plans, the Blue Jays could simply wind up in the hold category. They didn't give Vladdy a $500 million contract extension to dump players at the deadline, but if they do pivot towards unloading, they're teaming with players who could bring back the sort of talent suited to surround Guerrero in the next incarnation of his career. So let's start with this. Now, I will warn you guys ahead of time. The Jeff Passan show, or I guess they're not the special show, but the Jeff Passan report, he goes on to say some interesting things, and he is much different than some of the other reports we've heard from, obviously some stuff I covered in yesterday's video, John Schneider. Also, it's very interesting. Keegan Matheson, we'll dive into in a minute here. He's basically saying the Jays might actually be sellers, and he is not believing in this Toronto Blue Jays team, and he doesn't think that they can make a very strong push. Now, we've heard in the past, if they are, above 500 and they're directly in a playoff spot, they're going to be going, all in. They're going to be buyers. But Jeff Passan saying they might wind up in the hold category, which doesn't make a lot of sense to me, given the fact that Ross Atkins and all these different, guys are on the last year of their contract. But in a similar vein here, if they do end up, let's say 3 or 4 games below 500 by July 31st, it could be interesting. But he also drops this tidbit saying that Bichette is the headliner here. While few contenders need a shortstop, he could shift to second and fill the need for a number of teams. Of course, goes on to discuss right-hander Chris Bassett. Kevin Gosse was under contract for more year. Chad Green, Jimmy Garcia, Yariel Rodriguez. He goes on to list players that the Jays could trade if they're sellers. And at a time where, most fans, we're at a pretty all-time high for this season, at least following the Athletics series. You get humbled a little bit against the Phillies. I still think they're going to be okay. Bowden Francis had a horrible game. He's a big question mark now going forward. If he even, Eric Lauer is a better starter, I think, at this point than Bowden Francis. And we'll have a video on that coming out as well here. A lot of different things coming. But regarding this, I don't know if the Jays are going to be, if they're sellers. Bichette, according to Passan, is the headliner. So clearly, according to Passan here, there's a real world where Bo Bichette could get traded, assuming that the Jays turn into sellers. But at the same time, he doesn't talk much about the Jays being, buyers. And of course, we're still a couple months out, so there's still some things to be said there. There's some, different avenues to be had. But surrounding Chris Bassett and, Kevin Gausman, he lists a lot of these guys as potential trades, and not exactly what I wanted to hear from Jeff Passan. I was kind of hoping he'd say they're going to be going all in, they're going to be buyers, but I guess he doesn't believe at this point. So it'll be up to the Toronto Blue Jays to continue to believe in themselves and win these games. But again, the Bichette being the headliner tidbit is very interesting. Jeff Passan's pretty careful with what he says here. We've heard rumblings about Bob Nightingale back in January in the offseason and winter meetings, saying the Jays have an inclination to trade him and that he has no desire to return to Toronto. Keegan Matheson, on the other hand, kind of came out and said the opposite of that. He says, don't take too much stock into those things. So let me know down below where you stand. But Jeff Passan saying Bo Bichette could be gone at the trade deadline if things continue to go, I guess, downhill or start to go downhill is very interesting because, again, Keegan Matheson, in case you missed it, came out and said on the video that I had a couple days ago, I think they should go nuts at the deadline. I think there should be a big push in from the Blue Jays. It's time. So a very interesting, set of circumstances at this moment for this Toronto Blue Jays team. Let me know down below what your thoughts are on this report and, of course, the Jeff Passan one, which, it's not ideal, but it's also a little bit, Bo Bichette, we still have to keep it in perspective here. They probably keep him if they're anywhere near the playoffs. But if they're 5-6 games under 500, they're 6 or 7 games out of a playoff spot, wherever it ends up being, playoff spot being the final wild card spot, you have to then begin to be a little bit intrigued with how things are going to work, specifically regarding, Bo Bichette's future, because he is a pending free agent after this year. So let me know down below what your thoughts are on all of that. Let's dive into a ton of other updates we have today. Just wanted to throw this out there because it's a very, intriguing time of year. And we have another update for you all coming out very, very soon. But let's start with, another trade update because there's a ton of stuff going on. But let's start with a couple things here. Now, yesterday, ahead of the game, we had a ton of notes. Of course, the Jays made a little bit of moves. We'll have a video covering that later today, as well as some, other things. But Nick Sandlin felt good after pitching an inning in the Florida Complex League, which is good. He's aiming about a week or so until he returns. So about a week until Nick Sandlin returns. The Jays are going to be forced into a plethora of impossible decisions here going forward. And by impossible, I mean you have to juggle a ton of bullpen pieces. Who's going up, who's going down. It's going to be interesting. Will Wagner has been relegated to the Florida Complex League. Jays are hoping that Alek Manoah will progress to live bullpens within the week. Again, August was kind of the target date for him. Just a lot of things happening right now for the Jays. And if they can continue to play somewhat decent baseball here, they're going to be setting themselves up for a fantastic summer because you're going to be having a lot of players coming in. Santander had a PRP injection in his left shoulder. He's hoping to be back at some point, in the next few weeks. Just craziness right now. But most notably, Santander, a PRP injection. He's down for the next 4 to 7 days. Nick Sandlin's going to be returning soon. And I assume Santander, 3 to 6 days, whatever it ends up being, he's going to be out a little bit. Manoah, who's kind of been under the radar here, they desperately need some starting pitching. So to hear that from Manoah is a good sign. Of course, once we hear a bigger update surrounding Alek, that'll be obviously important there. Spencer Turnbull, he's working through some mechanical stuff with another AAA start planned. Jimenez gets 1 game off versus Philly, but will basically play every day. Probably the last game of the series against the lefty. And then, of course, Barger will now see more outfield time. We saw yesterday Barger in what was a very disappointing game do the non-disappointing thing, the only thing in the game, which wasn't disappointing, hit an absolute moonshot rocket. And we'll dive into that more in a minute here. Jimmy Garcia playing catch on flat ground. So a ton of updates there. A lot of guys are going to be returning soon. Jimmy Garcia inching closer and closer. Nick Sandlin inching closer and closer. It seems like Ryan Burr at this point is getting shut down a little bit. He's, iffy. A literal ton of moves are happening surrounding this team. And as the deadline inches closer and closer, the Jays are getting reinforcements. We have to see what this team really is because there's been a lot of talk about the offense against weak opponents. They are third in baseball with OPS versus ERA plus of 100. 100 being, of course, league average, which means the Jays are third in the MLB OPS against above league average pitching. So that narrative can go to rest. But the Jays starting pitching now has been the problem. They aren't pitching well. Their bullpen's good. Their starting pitching is not. They have 2 empty spots, really. Bowden Francis, I guess you don't consider him an empty spot. He had a good game against the Rangers, scoreless innings, 5. But despite those, he was getting hit hard, but the stadium was huge. And of course, 5 innings without giving up a run is good no matter what. But it's interesting there. Let me know down below what your thoughts are here. Tons of things are happening. The Toronto Blue Jays are absolutely rolling. We saw yesterday Eric Lauer in his last 2 bulk appearances have went, only given up, minimal runs. And by minimal runs, I mean, no runs and 0 hits in his last 7 1/3. So there's going to be a question now about whether he starts going forward. But ladies and gentlemen, a lot of things happening. We're keeping you up to date with all the latest. Make sure to hit the subscribe button. See you guys later. Cheers.